Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream number 71 Q&A AMA in the DNA.
So I wanted to say something about it. I thought about saying it in the main live stream, but I forgot that it is actually the birthday week of all four of our carnivorans here. And you can't see Maddie at the moment, but she's lying on the floor here beneath us, between us. And we actually know her birthday. Her birthday is tomorrow.
Yes.
And she is going to be 8, Maddie.
Maddie.
Because we knew her father.
We did know her father. Sailor. Marvelous sailor.
And he was quite a sailor dog.
He was.
And Tesla, the dark kitty in the background, is 10 this month. And the two youngers are 2 this month. They're not litter mates, but they're from a feral cat colony in Ashland, Oregon. So it is all their birthdays right now.
It's amazing.
Yeah, you're unimpressed. But
well,
anyway.
I don't believe they know their names, and I'm fairly certain they are unaware of their birthdays. Sorry.
The only reason to talk about things is if they're conscious of you talking about them.
No, it's not like that. I just, I don't know. It's awesome.
All right. Here we go. This, we're starting with a few questions from last week, go to the Discord question, and then questions from last hour before finishing off with questions from this hour. Hi, you beautiful people. So who's going to illustrate that Dr. Weinstein original in reference to the Let Loose the Seuss poem? I can imagine it already. I love this new outlier academia cathedral, and I'm proud to be a stone amongst cornerstones. May forums abound.
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. I would love to see that thing illustrated, but there is no part of me that imagines that is a minor task.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, I would love it if somebody was up for it. And I, as I was writing, and I certainly did think about the imagery that would go along with it.
You did?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know how you write poetry. I don't know how you write poetry. I mean, I don't know how you write poetry.
Well, in fact, as I mentioned on the last week's live stream that it was a very quick process. There's hours and hours of like going back and tinkering lines and things like that. But the basic thing emerged very rapidly, as did the first significant poem that I wrote.
But as it was emerging rapidly, you were visualizing it? You were imagining what the illustrations might be?
Yeah. Yeah, because in some sense I'm,
That actually surprises me a little bit because you're so auditory, you're so sound-based.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to that. But on the other hand, I think, the poem itself alludes to the fact that Seuss is lodged deep in all of our minds. And so there's something, he built a kind of visual language, and it is difficult actually in some ways not to imagine what Seuss, encountering that poem, what the visual language would say about it. And so, it wasn't like everything,
Sure.
had an image, but yes, a good many of them did. So anyway,
Cool.
Yeah, I would love to see it.
Okay, the second question from last week is, again, a comment, which I think you pulled up a visual for this one. It is, this, meaning this podcast, is like if Shaggy and Velma got PhDs and started a podcast.
So do you want to put up Shaggy and Velma? All right, here they are, right?
Yeah.
Now I just think this comment,
that guy needs a haircut more than you do.
Yeah, right. No, I think this comment is just a little unfair because I
don't know. I'm sure I watched Scooby-Doo a couple times, but I don't know the characters well enough. I don't have a deep knowledge.
Well, let's put it this way.
Scooby-Doo.
I mean, I think Velma is more on target for you. She's adventurous, a little bookish. It's not way off, but I just think 10 times lovelier than Velma, as lovely as she is, and
And you find what's his name? Shaggy to be a bit of a schmo.
I just I don't know. I wasn't sure what to make of it.
Okay.
I wasn't sure what to make of it.
And yet
here it is.
And yet I read it to you laughing last week, and you said, what? And then you found this image, and you said you didn't read it. I said, I don't think you wanted me to.
No.
So here we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I just thought I'd mention it because actually I do think there is something very incisive about the idea of them having gotten PhDs and started a podcast. And it was pretty funny. So wanted to highlight it.
Next question. I recently got my master's from an Oxbridge college, just after racial bias training became mandatory for current and future students. Is a PhD worth the personal cost of speaking untruths?
Well, this is a tough one. I have been saying to our children that in many ways, I don't think I could do what they must now do, living in a world in which untruths are so regularly deployed and with such force behind them. So I don't know what to make of this, because obviously there is a logic about living to fight another day. This is something it took me a long time to understand, but there's only so far you can go with that. And then the other thing is, if you decide, well, live to fight another day has to be the key rubric, because if you're going to accomplish something, you have to accomplish that first.
That's like the second half of Is This the Hill You Want to Die On, right? I mean, even if those don't emerge from the same thing, it's definitely, you can definitely put those two ideas together and make them sing.
Yeah, they are closely related. And the problem is,
if this isn't the hill you want to die on, then you're going to live to fight another day.
Right. If the person asking you if that's the hill you want to die on is also holding a weapon, it's a very different thing. And so
yes,
the problem, I would say, is, none of us gets out alive. There probably is a hill you should therefore be willing to die on, right? There are important things in the world, and the preservation of your well-being is not ultimately viable, especially if you are part of a society that is committing obvious suicide, right? So the hill to die on is somewhere, and we all ought to find that hill. I don't know what to do. I have almost no doubt that I would not. I mean, I barely survived the PhD program we went through at the time, and this was not a component of the problem. So,
wasn't there?
No, it wasn't there. There were lots of other problems, and my, instinct to go after things that aren't right definitely got me in a lot of trouble, but it was scientific trouble, and kind I'm proud of. I think the fights I chose were good ones, and I would still think that even if I hadn't finished, But nonetheless, I don't know what advice to give people going now, because on the one hand, the institutional structure is so broken that it's not obvious to me that having the degree and therefore the authority, or having the training and therefore the knowledge, is all that valuable in and of itself, because the programs are delusional in the first place for the most part. So,
well, I mean, that will obviously vary to some degree by discipline. And the problem more widely is, if this person says mandatory for current future students, so it's not clear if in this question racial bias training is mandatory in this field, for that department, or if it's college-wide.
Yes.
Increasingly, these things are becoming college-wide, and we saw evidence, we saw yet more evidence this week from a couple of terrific pieces, one written by Barry Weiss, one written by Caitlin Flanagan, on what is happening to secondary ed, especially the elite private schools. And, it's whole institutions that are falling to this thing. But presumably the world does still need chemists. And, so I fear that art, which we need, will fall completely as a set of disciplines sooner than the STEM fields will, because airplanes will start falling out of the sky and bridges will start collapsing.
Well, but I mean, in some sense, this is my point, is we do absolutely need these things, not optional. And you cannot do it in a world where your relationship to the truth is held to be facultative as a matter of your survival. Therefore, we are facing an existential crisis. And that does not mean that it is clear that if you go into the field, that ultimately things sort out. The question is, is it necessary? If your point is actually chemistry is very, very important and we have to remain clear-headed about it, then the point is maybe that has to be fought outside. That if you go into the thing that it owns and therefore can force you to accept fiction.
That it wokeness, not it chemistry.
Correct. Chemistry having surrendered to wokeness, and I can speak less about what's going on in chemistry.
But biology, yeah.
Yeah, but biology clearly has, right? Otherwise, there would be an uproar amongst biologists saying, actually, that nonsense that you're peddling over at Scientific American about us having gotten past the sexual binary is nonsense. Yeah. And,
No, and you get people who can legitimately say, how can you claim that sex is binary when all of these researchers and scientists and pediatricians and such say the other? Like, well, I can't explain them, but that doesn't make them right.
Yeah. So this goes back to the idea of 0 being a special number, right? To the extent that there are not programs that we can point you to where the chemistry is free of wokeness, that tells you what battle we're involved in. We're in a battle in which there can be no program in which chemistry is not afflicted by wokeness, because if there was, it would obviously be the top program. And therefore, if the outsiders can race to the front of the race just simply by not being crazy, then the point is that cannot be allowed, which is actually
therefore we go after merit.
Right, which is quite viewable in the attack on Substack this week. So there are now calls to
I don't know this.
Substack censor its journalists. And the point is, well, we can't very well have a game in which all of the mainstream outlets have to say these crazy wrong things if there are a bunch of people who are liberated to go to the audience directly and say true things, because, of course, they will be the only game in town. So how can they not be the only game in town? We're going to have to deplatform them.
So I didn't know that it happened. I met with the 2 founders of Substack a few years ago, back before really almost anyone had heard of them, and they flew up here to talk to me about whether or not I wanted to start one. And I was thinking about it, and I ended up not, and I still don't have one, as you know. But I specifically asked them, I think this was right after the kerfuffle with Patreon over Sargon of Akkad. And I was thinking, okay, maybe not Patreon, maybe Substack. I tend to want to put out more written content anyway than video content. And I was really impressed with these 2 guys, but I asked them specifically, what will your policy be in censorship space? And they didn't hedge a lot, but they hedged just a tiny bit. And I felt it was not that is the reason that I didn't end up creating a Substack. I didn't want, at that point, I think we had maybe just gotten our book contract. I didn't want to feel confined to be writing something on a regular basis for a different audience. But I remember the 3 of us having a conversation that I think was good on all fronts, in which I said, you will want to be very clear up front with this, because it will come for you.
Yes, it will come for you. The question is, what do you say? Because, of course, you don't want to set up a policy that allows people to put truly dangerous, possibly illegal, whatever it is. So you need to set up a rule that explains how discretion will be wielded and what will be protected. But that, I don't envy anybody who has to write that policy and face the consequences. It's not a simple matter.
I agree.
So, all right.
Yeah. Do mammals regularly physically discipline children? If so, does it suggest evolutionary utility or cast doubt on, quote, negative reinforcement never works?
Do mammals physically discipline, presumably, their own children?
Yeah.
Non-human mammals physically discipline their own children is presumably the question?
Yeah. The only example that comes to mind is male lions cuffing cubs who are playing on them when they're just sort of fed up. Like, leave me alone, kid. But that's not there's nothing abstract about that. It's not I saw you doing something that requires discipline. It's like, you're sitting on my head and I wish you wouldn't, and I'm going to get you out of here.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And I agree with you. I struggle for any example other than that one and other analogs. Probably you'd find the same in hyenas, but it's not a different.
Rhesus macaques, probably.
Yeah. But I think part of the answer is that there's a reason for it. And it actually goes to what I have frequently said about school as a supplement, right? And that the fact of school being a supplement is the result of the fact that we live in novel circumstances where supplements are necessary, right?
Yeah.
Hunter-gatherers are not uneducated. What they are is educated by the intersection between watching their immediate ancestors, their living ancestors, do the job that they do in the world, and following suit. So the point is, the world trains you properly. You don't need to be scolded. So imagine the following example. Imagine that you are walking down a sidewalk as a child, and you are not paying attention to your trajectory being straight. Right? There is a very abrupt place at which the world becomes fatally dangerous. And the possibility of straying over that line absent-mindedly does not mirror many things in nature. Now, there are cliff edges, but you are actually well programmed to appreciate the hazard of them rather than, a 6-inch drop that could get you killed.
I do think these are two different things, though, and we address both of them in our book. So this idea of discrete hard borders, that cliff edges, and to some degree water edge being the closest analog, but things like the garbage disposal, the curb, the swimming pool, right? Where in all of those cases, there's nothing that begins to give you a sense of the encroaching danger.
Yeah.
And cliff edges maybe a little bit, but even most natural bodies of water give you some indication, like you're sinking into the earth more as you get close, something like that, right? But then this question of, what do you need to be schooled in is, I guess there's an overlapping thing there, but it's distinct in that there's not only is there, this is specifically about punishment, and maybe schooled and scolded, maybe they have actually etymology in common, but not only is school almost unknown in non-human animals, but schooling and school is almost unknown in humans, aside from modern environments that are informed by weird Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries. And in fact, there are lots of examples of people who are doing really detailed, high skill things where the stories that they tell are, of course, I wasn't schooled in this. Here's an example. God, there's one thing we cite in there. I can't remember. I think it's one of these. Maybe it's these Japanese women abalone divers. I may be conflating two stories here, in which the anthropologist is saying, so, you learned from your mom. She's like, no, I didn't learn from my mom. My mom cuffed me and told me to go away and said I had to learn this on my own. There was no way I learned from her. And so, there's an actual antipathy towards schooling and towards instruction in not just most species, but where it could possibly be happening, but also in many human cultures.
Well, I agree, but to draw the connection about why I see the parallel in here is that to the extent, so when I scold one of our children, I am effectively, if I'm doing it right, I am speaking for their future self. I am chastising them so that they will learn a lesson that their future self will be glad that they have learned. And my point about mammals other than people, is that in some sense, the willingness, so I am also borrowing from my authority as a parent, but the alignment between the parent's view of the world, if you imagine a jaguar at the edge of a cliff with a cub, the cub has every interest in just simply modeling the state of mind of the adult and taking it on. And so as that parent becomes wary because the cliff is a hazard, my guess is there's an almost seamless transmission of, this is my opinion of this and this should be your opinion of this, rather than the attempt to escape authority, which is more complex in humans. But so something like that. I do think that there's an analogy.
Yeah, that's good. One more question from last week. Are there any health benefits to kombucha, or is it just a trend? I like it, but how effective are the probiotics in preventing illnesses? I don't know the research, but I have the sense that it, like other ferments, are useful to varying degrees depending on the brand and the age and all of this and your particular health, at helping you maintain and maybe helping you establish a healthy gut microbiome. And I will say that my very first kombucha was at the invitation of Joe Rogan in his studio when he was still in California, the one time that we did Joe Rogan together. As we were leaving, he said, "Hey, do you want a kombucha for the road?" And I thought,
for the road.
Never had a kombucha. I think I'll have one of Joe Rogan's very nice, very cold kombuchas. And I did. Yep. And I'm a fan ever since.
Yeah, no, I have actually, the one I got from Joe's fridge, I've been drinking it I've been savoring it.
And that one has ever less value.
Or ever more value, depending. I mean, it's a living drink. So,
God,
sorry. So I don't know about kombucha in particular.
Yeah.
I do have the anecdotal sense. So longtime viewers will know that I had an issue with asthma, which largely, almost completely, like 90% went away with my elimination of wheat from my diet. To the extent that there's any residual, I actually find certain things are very effective. One, hydration, number one.
Mm-hmm.
And second is fermented foods such as kimchi and sauerkraut.
And kombucha.
Yes, although I can say that I have detected the difference with sauerkraut and kimchi. I have not actually tested the difference with kombucha, but my guess is it works similarly.
Yeah. Okay, Discord question for this week. Are we meant to stay awake? My computer is not meant to stay awake, apparently.
Apparently not.
Are we meant to stay awake for a long period of time, then sleep for several hours? Or is this an unnatural way of doing things that was incentivized to fit the 9-to-5 work schedule? How did our ancestors used to sleep? What is healthy, and how do we know? That's a lot of questions.
Yep.
Did you want to start?
Well, sure. I don't know where you'll be headed with this. I would say I think the evidence is good that during sleeping hours, during hours in which it's too dark to be productive out in the world, the evidence is not one long bout of sleep, but there's a natural pattern that involves waking up periodically. I will say that for my part, anecdotally, I have the following experience. If I wake up during the night and make contact with the clock so that I know what time it is, and this is an unnatural circumstance. Clocks are unnatural in and of themselves.
You could look at the sky and see where the moon is.
Yeah, maybe.
If there isn't cloud cover, et cetera, et cetera.
I think there would be a lot of my sleep becomes super regular out in nature if I go backpacking.
I was just saying, what are there ways that you could tell what time it is relative to when you thought you would be sleeping out in nature often?
Yes.
Not as precisely as a clock.
Not as precise and not reliably so.
Right.
The moon could be obscured by clouds or whatever. But
so when you do that,
when I do this, if I make eye contact with the clock, let's say it's 2:30, and I make eye contact with the clock and I say, it's 2:30, I will very frequently be able to wake up with shocking precision at just about the moment that I had hoped to get up. And when that happens, one of the things we don't take seriously enough is the hazard of arbitrarily awaking in the middle of a sleep cycle. That ain't good for you, I guarantee. But but the degree to which one does not feel some awful burden of having to get out of bed if you wake up naturally at the end of a sleep cycle rather than arbitrarily in the middle of one is rather surprising.
Yes.
And so anyway, it is very good for me to have a moment of consciousness in the middle of the night that allows me to calibrate where I am. And then my assumption is that my regular clock-like functions in the mind actually count down or something and result in me landing at the right moment.
I wonder, though, why should it be more precise if you wake up in the middle of the night as opposed to counting down from if you know what time it is when you go to bed?
That's a great question. And this is testable, I think. One possibility is that there are processes taking place at different rates, and that partly our desire to be asleep all night without a break results in a miscalibrated something because there's a natural break in the middle. But if you go, if the last period before you wake up is continuous, and it's had a calibration in it, it's much more likely to work.
And I've wondered this too. The different types of sleep tend to have known periodicities, but they have variants. And what I've never run into, and this may well be out in the literature, and presumably some sleep researchers know this, but I just don't know what the answer is that variance in periodicity a population-wide variance or also an individual variance, which is to say, like if during REM sleep, your REM periods, for instance, tend to be 60 minutes long, is that always the case? Or if you wake up at 2:30 in the morning and you know you want to get up at 7, can your brain go like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do the math because I picked difficult numbers. But can your brain say, actually, that's 5.5 hours, and so I'm gonna make those 65-minute REM periods rather than 60, and so get you up at 5 minutes to 7. I guess I did do the math, but I'm not even sure if that's right. If it's all REM in the second half, then I don't remember exactly where all this thing gets divvied up. You get what I'm going.
I sure do.
Yeah.
In fact, I find very funny the idea of if you got a lot of pressure, sleep quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't mean for a brief period of time. I mean,
try
to pack
it
more
in.
into
pack it in.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And yeah. Oh, I mean, there's a ton to say here about sleep. I don't know what evidence there is, but I suspect it would be true if there were evidence, and would be true, and if there's not evidence yet, that many people absent electric lights and other indicators of urbanization do tend to sleep in chunks that aren't one big chunk in the middle of the night or throughout the night. But I don't know what the research is beyond like narrative evidence from medieval European peasants or something. It's like that's the thing I have in my head is waking up and spending an hour talking or something and then going back to bed. Maybe also Inuit, and maybe there's a hunter. I feel like I know like bits and pieces where like yes, people do this, but they're all like little examples that strike me as anecdote at the level that I can come up with them.
Yep.
Okay. First question from this last hour. What is more likely? Evergreen naming a building after the two of you, or 12 impartial jurors being impaneled unafraid of the consequences of a Chauvin acquittal? What real peace can be brought from the public sacrifice of even a despised man? See John Adams in the Boston Massacre. Yeah, I think it's more likely that Evergreen names a building after us, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And, I tried to point this out early on.
Yes, you did.
And it's, not only is it very unlikely that jurors could possibly set aside the hazard. Even, well-intentioned objective jurors cannot be deaf to the fact that the consequences of exonerating Chauvin could set the world on fire. And so anyway, yeah, people are human. And this is incredly dangerous, but beyond.
So just to be clear, you were trying to say, I believe, take out their own personal safety. If they are even if they are completely anonymous and protected, and there's no way to ever know who any of them are, the effects on the world will be something that they would have to live in and be feeling responsible for.
And in fact, I think you can detect this very thing in what I think is the only famous thing that Rodney King has ever said. Rodney King said, "Can't we all just get along?" And, my recollection of that, I hope it's accurate, my recollection is that he was shocked and feeling responsible for essentially, rioting taking place on his behalf, right?
Yeah, in his name, even though he never wanted it.
In his name, right. And so anyway, I do think his point was the right one. I respect him greatly for trying to step in and restore sanity. But the basic point is, yes, any rational person cannot put aside entirely the fact that terrible things could happen as the result of a verdict in this case. Yeah. And the problem is that the facts of the case are complex, to say the least, right? And I said this on Rogan and didn't know what would happen, but the facts of the case are complex. which means...
And you engaged John McWhorter in a conversation about this as part of your conversation with him last summer as well.
Yep, that's true. But the necessity, right? What I fear most in some ways is the sense that the system will declare that he must be convicted.
Right.
And that it will convict him unfairly because in some ways the system will just register the greater good of not setting riots off and all of this as paramount. And the point is, you cannot have a system in which we suspend due process, because if we don't suspend due process, people will bring violence to the public, right? You cannot have a system run by those willing to engage in violence. That is the beginning of the end. And so we must have a fair trial, irrespective of what happens downstream of it. Right. And I'm not convinced that we will.
No, I agree. Just one more point on this. You've seen these visuals of like the pyramid of white supremacy, right? So it's like genocide is at the top, and things like being race blind are at the bottom, and the idea is that everything above something on the bottom level is built on everything that came before. And these are super divisive and frankly racist tropes that are now spreading. But I saw one this week that actually had "Why can't we all just get along" as part of the white supremacist pyramid.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
Well, starting next week, if Ibram Kendi does not respond, we will begin to build a framework in which being not racist is once again on the map and understood to be so, I will hope.
I'm super not racist.
That's true. But this week, what is it? We're just in trouble saying such things.
Where were we? Here we go. Greetings, professors. Would you give any advice for an involuntary university student who withdrew in his late 20s, who is still haunted by hunger for knowledge and the guilt for not meeting his ambition of making an intellectual contribution? So one thing I would say is the idea that you have guilt for not meeting your ambition of making an intellectual contribution based on the fact that you didn't finish college, there's a disconnect there. I wish there were more opportunities to make intellectual contributions that were easy, and that there were a route for some people that was clear, and that there is no clear route at this point because the one that we had is so broken. But there are plenty of ways to make intellectual contributions that don't actually require a degree. So I don't think you should feel guilt for withdrawing from especially a broken system, and imagine that means that you are thus thwarted.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would maybe say more directly that, speaking as professors, speaking as people who did, in your case, you shined throughout the system. In my case, I made it through to PhD, top level you can make degree-wise. But when I...
And earned, not just did you ultimately get the degree, but also earned one of the top awards for the work that you did, as did I, a different one. But but you didn't just, by some measures, you squeaked by because there were people who didn't want you to succeed, but there were others who saw what you were doing.
To be clear, I have no sense of embarrassment about what I accomplished. I think I accomplished quite a bit more than was necessary to get a degree, but I did barely get by because I did have a lot of antagonists by the time it was over. But anyway, the point of this is...
Some of whom you poked first.
I may have kicked the hornet's nest. But the point I wanted to make is, even having gotten the degrees and seen the system and then taught in the system for 14 years, I never assume that if somebody did not graduate from any level of this, that tells me where they are with respect to their ability to think. I never do. And the reason I don't is that I've seen so many counterexamples of people who are wickedly good at thinking who don't have the credentials. And so...
But you and I are unusual in this. Most people in the system take the degree as the thing that you need if I'm going to talk to you. Like
Right.
without the degree, I know you're not worthy is, I mean, sometimes actually the stated position of some academics.
Well, actually, okay, there are two things that need to be said here. One, if you did it without the system, if you've managed to figure out how to think without all of that scaffolding, in my book, you get more credit, right? To the extent that you are self-taught, all the better. But I also want to just say, I got my degree in the end because I had to in order to get the job that I was already doing. I was told that I would need the degree if they were to hire me permanently, and there was a competition and all of that, but whatever. The point is, I went through this phase, and it wasn't that I couldn't have gotten my degree because I couldn't have gotten it. I was disgusted with the process by the time that we moved to Olympia for you to start the job that you had gotten. And so I didn't really want the degree. I didn't like what it meant. I didn't like what came with it. And so ultimately I was forced to go back and get it. I'm glad that that happened. However, I know that one of the things that I valued about not having it was that it meant that all of the people who don't take you seriously because you don't have the degree, I didn't need to bother with them, right? So it sorted the world nicely. People who were still willing to interact over content, even though I didn't have the degree, that tended to be a smaller, much more interesting group of people. So anyway, there is something to be said for having the degree. It settles certain things in people's minds, but no, if you're maintaining an intellectual life outside of that system, more power to you.
Yeah. So, the question is, what do you do? You're still haunted by hunger for knowledge and you've got guilt. I think, hopefully we've assuaged the guilt, explained why the guilt doesn't have any place here. Haunted by hunger for knowledge. You don't say anything about what kinds of things you're interested in. So, it would be impossible for us to say how you go about doing this, but, become an autodidact, become someone who can figure out how to learn themselves, how to teach themselves how to learn, and be, a critical part of that will be being open, just remaining open to any time you have a glimmer of like, oh, that might be interesting. Oh, my brain just sparked over there. Unless it's junk, fill in the blank. Junk food, junk sex, junk news, junk whatever it is. If you didn't think you were interested in, I don't even know, 12th century China, and you see something that goes like, oh, I wonder, go watch it, go read it, go do whatever it is. And, you won't be able to follow all of those trails. We are big fans, as we write about in our book, of being generalist as much as possible, but recognize that everything that you do that expands your breadth has the likely cost of not being able to go deep on something, another step deeper on something you already know. So, certainly breadth early, because if you start investing in depth early, at the point that you do get exposed to more stuff, you're much more likely to find that actually the thing you went deep on should have been like 5th on your list of things you wanted to go deep on, and there's other things more interesting to you out there. So expose yourself as broadly as possible early on to figure out what kind of knowledge you're really most interested in. What ways of informing yourself and producing new information in the world are you both best at and most driven to participate in?
And I would just add, as much as a lot of the modern landscape is heavily compromised by all sorts of stuff, there's also really, really good stuff there. And the number of people who will teach you what they know for free on YouTube is staggering. And the number of ways, I'm very fond of videos in which somebody who knows how to do something amazing shows the production of it without a word. And the point is, that's a great way to train your mind. How much do I understand about what they just did in order to reach this end point? Right? That's a great exercise. And especially if you have the ability to try to recreate it. Wow, that's unusual.
It's really low.
Yep.
We got a helicopter flying real low over our house. It's going to crash into one of our very many trees. That was an airplane, not a helicopter? Yeah. Oh, yeah. It didn't have the... Yeah. Okay, then it's not going to land.
It wasn't.
So I'm not so concerned.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for the podcast. Secondly, where can one start learning biology outside of the academic system? Well, so this is a related question, right? And partially here to some degree, although we're not trying to create curriculum, so it's not organized. And similarly, our book, which still isn't out for 6 more months, actually 6 months tomorrow, I think, is, organizes to some degree, but isn't meant as a curriculum. And so, depending on what kind of biology you're interested in, for instance, the one book that you and I almost always started with when in each of our programs was The Selfish Gene. 1976, Richard Dawkins, still the classic, in need of updating, Bret. And yet, there's a few ways in which it's dated, but he wrote such a terrific book that although it could use some updates, there's very little in it that is out of date, if that distinction makes sense.
It was almost entirely right as far as it went.
Right.
There is...
But it remains almost entirely right as far as it goes.
Yes,
which is surprising. Like both of those things,
and to the degree to which the field has moved on and discovered great evolutionary truths to stack on top of it is it's incorrect. It has not largely happened. So, in any case, it's a great place to start.
Yeah. And frankly, if you're interested in sort of the other half of evolutionary biology, which is to say the sort of origin of species and deep history stuff, another Dawkins book, which was always a book that I used when I taught vertebrate evolution, is An Ancestor's Tale, which is terrific as well.
It's a great one. I would recommend if you're interested in adaptation itself. Climbing Mount Improbable is quite excellent.
More Dawkins.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, the man is a gifted writer and deeply insightful.
If you're interested in tropical biology, short book, but you've mentioned it, and I feel like it was right here. There's Climbing Mount Improbable. There's A Selfish Gene. Tropical Nature.
Tropical Nature.
Yeah. Just absolutely terrific.
That's
book.
A great one.
We're going to have no answers off the top of our head if what you're really interested in getting into is molecular biology, for instance.
Yeah, but a lot of that stuff too is available on YouTube. If you're interested in how cells function, you got to figure out where the good stuff is rather than the stuff that cuts corners. But there's a lot you can learn cellular biology on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing.
Cool.
You're at about 43 minutes.
Yep. Well, we've only answered a couple here in this hour, so we're gonna get through a few more of these at least. I think so. These are two questions from the same person. I think they're different questions, but they may both have to do with your conversation with Jordan Peterson. I'm not totally sure.
Okay.
Wouldn't consciousness overriding the genes, as you put it, simply be in service of the genes as well? Since evolution would select for self-policing genes to increase fitness by weeding out the bad and keeping the good.
Lovely question.
So that's actually, did you talk, so again, I haven't listened to your conversation. Did you talk about Omega with Jordan?
Yep.
So let me just read the second question, because the short answer to that question is yes, right? In service of the genes. Wouldn't it be in service of the genes?
Yes, but you have to be really careful about what yes it is. There's no question. The fact that we are going to drive ourselves extinct by following the genes narrowly and continuing to play the game that they taught us to play so well, right, does not mean that it is useful that ultimately the preservation of those genes would be in the genes' interest if only the genes could figure it out.
Yeah, but that's not, I think you read a lot more into the question than is there. Wouldn't consciousness overriding the genes, as you put it, simply be in service of the genes as well? That's part of Omega principle right there.
Yes, but the problem is the game theory, of course. And so the point is the recognition that this is ultimately true, that if only the genes could think, they would be in favor of the things that we think on their behalf, is true, but it does not solve the game theory problem, which is deep and for which I've already been taken to task once by somebody who did not realize that I was aware of that hazard.
By a biologist?
Yeah.
You'll tell me off air?
Of course.
I love Jordan Peterson. The second question reads, but feel that he misses the mark with regards to games of social hierarchies by not realizing that competence itself is a form of power one might wield. I enjoyed seeing how much you agreed on in the end. So I'm not sure that's a question, but you might riff briefly.
Well, I agree. Jordan and I do agree on a ton, and I love that. And I think he and I have a kind of shared delight over the fact that these come from very, very different places. And so, if there's one way to know when you're thinking correctly, it's that somebody who has high quality tools starting from a completely different place arrives in the same location or roughly there.
Yeah.
So
Well,
anyway,
I feel like, again, I will watch or listen to your conversation with him, and I look forward to doing so. But not having seen really anything from him for a while, now one of the things that I think the two of you have in common, and it's not the only thing, is that you both love it when people disagree with you. And, a lot of people can't imagine that there's anyone like that out there. I try for that to be true for me, but I have to try. And there's definitely been moments, especially in teaching, when it felt amazing, but I think, I know that you, and I think that Jordan actually just walk around the world like hoping for people to disagree with you at some level. Not out of a sense of, not nitwits and not people in bad faith and all of this, but you want to be challenged so that what you know to be true becomes a better and better representation of the truth.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the things that I'm
of reality
most frustrated by, I guess I would even say angry about, with the collapse of the institutions and it taking out our field with it, is that, it did not create the proper, proper level of challenge, right? It's really easy to beat the field because the field is pretty stupid, right? The field is stupid, not because the people are in it are stupid, but because there are reward structures that cause the field to stick with wrong ideas long after it should, which makes it easy to outthink it. But that's not so fun. What would be really fun is if the field were super vibrant. And the point is, yes, it would then be harder to beat. But the point is the quality of all of our thinking would go up because there would be, high quality challenge. And so anyway, I'm sure that Jordan has a similar sense. And in essence, we end up having to meet people from other fields. Renegades from different fields may actually be better at pushing each other around than members of your own field whose errors in thought you already know thoroughly.
Yeah, and you share a sort of intellectual developmental environment, so that your biases and assumptions are the same, and it's harder to see where they're flawed.
Yeah.
Do you fix your own dogs? Every article online seems that this is about reproductive fixing.
Yeah, I gleaned that.
Fix. I hate that. I'm going to use the scare quotes. Do you fix?
No, it says we're going to fix them.
We're going to fix them right up. Yeah. Do you fix your own dogs? Every article online seems only to be propaganda to exaggerate the benefits. I can't shake the feeling that I chose wrong, and if I'm a responsible owner, fixing it could be a net negative for the dog. It's a real question.
Yep.
And it has potentially different answers depending on the sex of the dog.
Yeah, we've fixed all of our animals.
Yeah,
we considered
we've only had one dog. We've had a lot of cats, and we fixed all of them. We thought about not doing it.
Yep, but it's just impractical.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean if you've got if you're living on a ranch and your dog is able to be outside and all of this, that's one thing, but it just isn't. It is not practical for most of us, and for us, I don't think the argument that it is worse for the animal is all that persuasive, because I think these animals have a very good deal if they have an owner that really cares about them and will go the distance for them.
It's less like, especially for males, I think it's less like the experience of being a wild animal.
Yep.
It's less like the life they would have had.
Yeah.
But they still have a terrific life.
Yeah, they have a terrific life. But the trade is a good one. And I think, what I was going to say is that for you and me, obviously we're animal behaviorists. To the extent that these animals bring a degree of animal behavior to our house that then we can think about and talk about, that's great. And so we would like to leave them as intact as possible. But even
Absolutely.
with that as a priority, it's really, we're facing the discipline issues on the 2 kittens, and this is a problem more with cats than dogs, where early bad developmental experiences
that we weren't present for,
had nothing to, no knowledge of, have implications for the way the animal is. These are well socialized creatures, but they're not easy to get along with. They're destructive and very hard to change their behavior, among other things. But and
styrofoam.
I think especially Fairfax would be even more of a terror if he was intact. And so anyway, I think the way I would think of it is, but for the ability to render them capable of playing along in an internal or an indoor environment without creating havoc, they wouldn't have lives at all.
Yep.
And so, that's the trade, and we just kind of got to get used to it.
Yep, I agree. Last week's potatoes do or don't want to be eaten talk, which is to say the Discord question from last week about really should we be eating potatoes, made me think, is domestication a good evolutionary strategy for the domesticated, for the gene, the individual, or the species? And what does this mean if the aliens invade? So we talked about the domestication question last week a fair bit, and the answer ends up being just as we were just saying with regard to cats and dogs. They are alive, and probably wouldn't be but for us having domesticated them or fixed those individuals.
I would say there's one major difference in the agricultural version of that story versus the pet version, which is that because the agricultural version takes place out of sight and is so directly driven by market incentives, the way we raise animals in that context is absolutely appalling, and there's no defending it.
Yes.
That is separate from the question of, in principle, at the point that you domesticate an animal and then at the end of its life you eat it. What does it think of that? Obviously, we're not talking consciously, but would it prefer not to be and not to get eaten, or does it prefer to be and have a good life that suddenly comes to an end? I think it's quite clear that our instinct, because if we try to put ourselves in the mind of the domesticated animal, we are so horrified by this, we cannot grasp the actual long and short of it, which is, look, you're going to die. It could be horrible. Does that mean you'd rather not have been? No. Right? We all get that.
And so, what does this mean if the aliens invade? Well, if they're those kinds of aliens who are interested in domesticating us or in driving us extinct, the option that's not on the table there, that we took off the table for, say, chickens a long time ago, but there would only be a few wild, whatever they are, jungle fowl around today. But for that, is the equivalent is where we are now. So if it's those aliens, we prefer that they never show up, right? So if they've shown up, do we prefer to be domesticated versus to be driven extinct? I think, the logic has to extend to evolutionarily, we prefer to be domesticated. But, the third option is we prefer they're not there. We prefer that they don't show up and force the choice on us.
Well, I think it's a little different. For one thing, I think there is zero chance that the aliens we're talking about aliens that are capable of getting here, which tells us a certain amount about who and what they are. They're not going to come here to eat us. Right.
Well, so I did preface this by saying if it's those kinds of aliens, they've come here, they're hostile, they want one of two things. They either want the planet for themselves or they're willing to keep us around as domesticates.
Well, but that's the question, is what is the viable category in which they take us on as co-inhabitants of the planet? If the planet has resources, minerals that they need and they're going to exterminate us, then we know what our approach is. If they are going to leave us intact here,
maybe they think we're cute.
Well, but that's the thing is,
really like pets.
And actually this is well done in the Tripod series, in which effectively this has happened, and there is a chapter in there, The Master's Cat, I think, in which one of the people who's been taken into the Tripod City understands himself to be effectively the cat of his master, and it's not the relationship that we all have with our cats. It's it's much more terrible. But in any case, the point is, if the aliens came here and were interested in a mutualism,
Right.
which is what we are effectively arguing we have with our domesticated animals, then the point is actually there are mutualisms that would be worth signing up for, but we would not
that's
want to
good.
sign up for a subservient relationship in which our interests don't count and their interests count, and we take on that role. But, you know, let's put it this way. There are some things that the aliens probably know that it would be a really good time if we figured it it'd be a real good moment to figure that out, because we may not be around much longer if we don't.
Yeah. So you're inviting them?
I believe they should make contact. They can reach the moderator at moderator.
DarkHorse.moderator.
DarkHorse.moderator.
Obviously.
Yeah. All right.
Once content-generating neural net tech, for instance, deepfakes, makes video footage inadmissible, might neocon blackmail paddle cults like Epstein's cease? Media was never proof, like drawing, writing, and gossip, until 1800s film tech. That is a mouthful.
I'm not getting the assertion yet. What? So I get the deep fakes.
Once basically deepfakes
are so good you can't tell that that's what they are.
Neocon blackmail paddle cults, like Epstein's cease. So the claim is that Epstein did whatever that thing was by effectively holding people hostage because he had evidence against them. I think. Yeah, that's where we are.
I'm not sure that we are headed to the priors of this question. In other words, are we not going to be in an arms race about deepfakes? In other words, I'm not convinced that there is a simple endpoint to the admissibility of video evidence. What I think you will have is increasing sophistication at avoiding detection. You will, so
we expect an arms race where there's increasing sophistication of detection.
Yeah,
as well. And I've seen almost none of that. And right after Obama left office, I saw a pretty compelling deep fake of him saying things he'd never said. So that's now, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And presumably a lot has happened since then in terms of the technology. But what I haven't seen is the evidence of where the counter part of that arms race is.
Yeah. You don't want to know. It'll drive you crazy.
No. This would be the important part, the good part.
You're not going to like it.
It's not good enough.
No, it's horrifying in its own right. Like, imagine that you have to bug yourself in order to ensure that if somebody comes up with a deep fake of you, you can prove it didn't happen. Right?
Mm-hmm. I'm moving to the Amazon.
No, it's already there.
Where? An hour. Okay. Let me get. God, there are too many good questions here. Another 2 more, and then we'll we'll go to the next hour. Gosh, I'm sorry. Does encouraging humans to be more cooperative and less competitive from a young age? There's an extra word in here. Hold on. Could encouraging humans to be more cooperative and less competitive from a young age be the solution to counteract our gene propagation mechanism as a species? If not, then what will be a viable solution to this problem?
The problem is we cooperate to compete. And so to the extent that you are teaching collaboration, you are also teaching competition. And there's a question about what level to teach it, right? Who will you collaborate with against whom? And so, yes, there are likely to be developmental answers. If we could figure out how to teach the lessons about how to collaborate, we could get rid of processes that are dangerous and destructive. But naming here's the thing that, look, sports teach you to cooperate to compete, right? It's the perfect example.
Yep.
Right? So sports are good. They'll teach you certain stuff. They probably teach you how to fight a war, right? If you're going to be, in a group of people that has to face danger together, knowing how they're going to think. It's very analogous to what happens on a sports pitch. But what the lesson is for the game theoretic problem that the questioner is asking about, I don't think we know, and we should be figuring it out, is I think the answer, but I don't think we know yet.
Yeah. Okay. There's actually just a comment here, and then one more question, then we'll move to the next hour. The comment is the problem. Apropos our conversation last hour, the problem is that the simple diagnostic they use for depression also covers normal sadness, and we live in a time of irresponsibility. People would rather take meds than make better or new life choices. And I think this is, to the point that you made, that depression is a category that includes more than one thing. It's both the pathological form and the non-pathological form.
Right.
Yeah.
The pathological form and the non-pathological form exist together, and we tend to name the category after the pathological form, which gets the study, and that results in us not grokking the benign version or the useful version.
Right. Bret, regarding dyslexia, I know that Heather is your reader and ours, but I see you read successfully at times. What have you done to improve? My son is dyslexic. Also, what is the name of the third cat?
Depends. Which is the third cat?
I think probably. So we've got Fairfax and Moxie, which is a nickname of Melrose, because we try to name our cats after LA streets, because when we don't, we end up with really stupid names, and we'll tell you that story another time.
No, we won't. We're not even going to allude to. I don't want them to know that it happened.
And yet, our third cat, the 10-year-old this month, does not have a stupid name, and yet is also not named after an LA street, and he is Tesla.
Yeah.
Named after the scientist, not the car, as you have said.
Yes.
So, what have you done to improve your reading?
Well, first of all, I should tell you, when I was a kid, I lived in abject terror of being asked to read out loud. And when, as so frequently happened, we were in a circle in the class, and we were each reading a paragraph, and it was coming around to me, I would abandon all attempts to keep track of what we were reading, and I would count paragraphs and try to figure out what paragraph I was going to have to read, and then I would try to read it through enough times that I knew what it said, so at the point that I had to read it out loud, I did not embarrass myself.
That sounds like an education.
No, it wasn't. It was a survival skill.
It's terrible.
It was terrible.
And I've seen, even when we were teaching undergraduates, and when we would, not you and I co-teach, but when I taught with some other faculty, some of whom I really admired, I would see them do read aloud, which didn't happen a lot in college classrooms, but did in some, and not let people pass. And my sense was, you always let someone pass if they feel like there's no good that will come of this. You don't force public reading on people.
Well, here's the problem, though. I agree, because there's this particular thing with reading, and what happened to me was traumatic. It was not useful. But I do have the sense on a related topic, that is to say, speaking, that there is a rubric like the following one. Speaking publicly is a useful skill, like being able to read. Almost all of us have terror about it at first. And the thing that cures it is getting through the terror successfully a small number of times, so that you can get to the point where there's actually a reward for having done it. And so my sense is, I don't want to free students from having to present in front of the class. And in fact, I want them to do it enough times that they walk away with that skill.
Okay, but that's different. So I do want you to answer this question, but being required to read privately in order to do work that is being assigned is a legitimate requirement in an educational setting, just as, and I required this in almost all of my programs. If anytime I had a long project that students were doing, they were going to have to not just write a paper, but also give a public presentation, an oral presentation of that work. And yes, people are terrified of it, but really, I hardly ever had anyone come to me and say, please, can I do something else? I really am scared of public speaking, because frankly, in my classes, as I think in yours, students just knew how that would sound. Like, yes, I get that you're scared, And I get that this feels like a trauma, but that's part of the reason you need to do it. That is different from being forced to read or frankly speak in any given classroom conversation. And, I feel like some of those same faculty would be like, everyone has to talk at least once in any given seminar. Like, God, no, because I had an easy time reading aloud as a young student, but I never talked in class. And the prospect of doing so would have had exactly the same effect on me as the prospect of reading aloud would have had on you. I wouldn't have had an ability to pay attention to anything that happened in the class until I had finally said what, checked that little box, which would have completely made the educational value of the experience plummet.
Okay. So I think the thing that you and I would converge on here is that the right thing to do is to be upfront about the fact that this will be required.
Absolutely.
Be very clear about why you're requiring it, right? That I actually...
And promise not to spring it on someone.
Right.
Like you're not going to show up in class one day, not just spring it on them like at some point during this quarter that you're going to be required to do this and hey, today's your day. But on March 30th, that's the day that you have been scheduled to come in and do your 10-minute this or your 20, like whatever it is. Like you'll know that it's coming.
Yep.
And
plenty of
no pop talk quizzes.
Yep.
Like it's not going to happen.
Right. Well, I think it should be open to people who want to. And frankly, one of the things that's best about having people come up to the board and try to explain something is that they actually...
That's opt-in.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Opt-in.
I'm up for that because one thing that, the distinction that I have pointed to repeatedly about the difference between knowing how something is done and knowing how to do it, it's very easy to sit in a class and not have any idea how hard it is to convey something clearly. Yep. And so then they hear you say something that's not quite clear in the sense of like, come on. And then it's like, okay,
try.
I really want you to try this because you're going to find out what happens and then you'll know a lot.
No, and actually, so we're spending probably too much time here, but I actually began to do little public speaking things through the quarter. Especially if I was doing like a 2-quarter program, in addition to some larger presentation at the end for some longer project. And the value in that, in part, was as soon as a student has gotten up in front of the class and seen what it is to be faced with those faces, some of whom are paying attention and some of whom aren't, and you can tell. You just know. And even if you've banished the devices from the classroom, as I tended to, like, who's actually paying attention, who's got their phone to the tail, whatever, you can see in people's eyes. Every one of those students, as soon as they've been in front of the class, becomes more receptive when it's the faculty in front of the class going like, okay, guys, come on, you all need coffee. Like, look alive here. People begin to have theory of mind about the position of what it is to be in front of the class.
Yeah, that's true.
How did you teach yourself to read more effectively?
So I do think a lot of this dyslexia, so I don't really think dyslexia is a thing. I think it is a symptom of several things. And one of the problems with it is that to the extent that reading is arduous, and that is my experience of it, and I'm now to the point where I read short things easily, but a very long thing still feels quite arduous. And so it's like there's some distance you're comfortable running, and then there's some distance that would feel like a real slog. It's like that distinction. So one thing is, if reading is arduous, you will do less of it. And I am convinced that virtually all of my trouble with spelling, which is like hilariously spectacular, is the result of a arm's length relationship with reading. It's some symptom of the same thing. It's a downstream consequence of what happens if you...
Yeah, you just haven't seen as many words as people who spell well.
I think of them auditorily because that's my relationship to language. So the answer is, how do you get over it? Read more. That's a slog, so it's a little bit like saying play better tennis, but that is where the key is. And how do I read out loud better than I once did? I very frequently go over the thing beforehand, because if I didn't, I would stumble over it like crazy, and it would be just like, I mean, I now wouldn't be embarrassed about it, but...
But how did you become motivated to read more? I mean, you grew up in a family of educated people where there were books lining walls and such. I don't think your family had as much of an emphasis, like there wasn't as much sitting around reading as there was in my family, but both your parents have advanced degrees, et cetera. So it wasn't that you didn't know that there was value in it as a child?
Well,
How did you come to, because I think especially I remember what it says, it just says my son is dyslexic, but how do you excite interest? And we have this with, if we have this with our kids too, like
yes.
how is it that you create the incentive?
So it is more complicated than that, because the real answer is that there is a tension between the value of what's in books and the cost of what is in books. And that cost is not simply the investment of reading them. And so for me, I am keenly aware that when you read a book, especially a book, part of the reason that I may like shorter things better, even if I read a bunch of them and so it amounts to book length reading, part of the reason that I like it better is that it's very hard to resist the mindset of somebody who wrote a book if you go through their whole book, right? If you take that mindset and then you abstract it to a magazine article, you still get a chance to take a tour through their worldview, but you don't take it on. And part of the problem is that one of the costs of books is that once you have inhabited somebody's mindset, it is very hard to remember what the world looked like before you knew what it was. And so that has a consequence, a positive one, which is that you get the benefit of what that person knows, and a negative one, which is that you've taken on some of their blind spot. And so in any case, the point is, it's not that I have overcome it. It's that I have moved my assessment of cost and benefit to a place where, I have a very high threshold. If I start reading something, even if I think there's good stuff in there, but it's not paying back, or it's saying stuff I really think is wrong, right? It's very hard for me to keep going with it. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I've done exactly what you think.
Well, I feel like you answered the inverse question. Now I want to know how you managed to get any reading done at all.
Because I don't understand how the answer isn't obvious. It's a cost-benefit relationship. And at the point, given your internal model, at the point the benefit exceeds the cost, you're motivated to do it. And at the point you perceive the cost exceeding the benefit, you stop. And
so that's what you tell your 9-year-old.
No, what you tell your 9-year-old
I don't know if he's 9, but
hang in there. Your 9-year-old probably needs to read more, right? Probably getting them to the standard of everybody else may not be doing them a favor. In fact, it may be that if they have the kind of mind that benefits from the independence.
Were you ever driven to comic novels? Like, were you driven, like, I know boys in particular tend to get told, and our boys never had it, and I don't know if you did, but boys in particular tend to gravitate towards things that aren't considered serious when they're children and they're supposed to be learning to read, and they end up looking at I don't know, like manga and anime and such. And my sense has been there's some stuff in that corner of the universe that I don't want, once it goes towards porn, I don't want my kids anywhere near it. But also, if you need to read in order to get the value out of the thing, why on earth would you tell the children that they shouldn't be doing that and they need to pay attention to this horrible stuff instead? Right?
Yeah. No, I had none of that.
You had you did. Okay.
I didn't. And my sense is I took stuff apart instead, and that was very, very good for me. So it's not like,
again, not helping the, how do you encourage a child to read?
No, I think it is helping in the following sense, because the parent of a child who has an obstacle needs to understand what problem they're actually trying to solve. And part of the problem is, you absolutely need to be able to read to do certain things. And the other part of the problem may be this may be building other kinds of skills that'll be really useful. Yeah. And I don't want to substitute one for the other.
So maybe the thing that's missing from this conversation that you and I have both said a lot is, given how that question sounds, given that it's written in, good English by someone who clearly knows how to read, and with a parent who cares, your son's not going to end up illiterate, and he may read a lot later than you were hoping for. But if while his peers are learning to read and even learning to love to read, your son is instead taking apart things, learning how to put them back together, or learning to play the guitar, or any number of other things, there's a good chance that that's going to be a deeply held skill and love that serves him.
Yeah. Actually, it occurs to me, as much as your encapsulation is exactly right, that I do know the answer to this.
Awesome. I kept
Okay.
trying to get you there.
Well, it took a little work. Sometimes things are like that. The answer is to read with them and don't keep moving on to new stuff. Moving on to new stuff is what adults do because reading is about the content.
So wait, hold on. When you're saying read with them, you're not. So I did a lot of reading to our boys and actually to all of us. We read, we read the Tripod series, and we read Harry Potter, and we read Laura Ingalls Wilder, and we read a lot of these big line Madeleine L'Engle and such. But also, that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about you specifically, because I was tearing my hair out and it wasn't the relationship was not working.
Yep.
But with our younger son, Toby, you would have him read to you.
Yep.
And rather than push on, you would go over and over and over and over again. And I don't think it was fun for either of you, but it worked.
No, we made it fun because he would read something and it wouldn't be what was on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And I would.
And you recognize that part of his brain in a way that I was like, I don't even know how you're living. Like, I don't know what it is to walk through the universe like this.
Right.
And you recognized it.
I mean, it's easy for me to recognize. And anyway, the point is, it's sort of like.
So you'd say it back to him and be like, does that make sense?
No, I wouldn't. Oh, no.
No.
Are you kidding? That's
Okay.
way too straightforward. I would start from the premise that it did make sense and then extrapolate to the universe that would imply. And that, of course, turned everything on its head.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was fun.
Yeah. And it worked because, as I presume your son is the person asking the question, smart boy who, no problem with language and spoken. Like, this kid who the teachers always be like, his vocabulary is extraordinary, but ask him to write and it's illegible. Like, what's going on there?
Not only illegible,
disconnect?
but,
yeah,
it's got lots of issues. But,
right.
But anyway, yeah, there is. So again, the key thing, however you operationalize it, is that adults read as a means to an end. It's about the content, whether that's narrative fiction or nonfiction, and you're trying to learn about a subject, but you read, there's no point in going back unless like you didn't get it all the first time. Mm-hmm. Right? If your point is to read with children so that they read better, then the point isn't about the content. It's about the process. And so going through the same thing twice, the second pass through something where you've made error after error and probably didn't get the content because you were making so many errors that it made no freaking sense, mm-hmm. right? Going back to that same thing and being able to read it all the way through out loud so that it makes sense and so that you're not stumbling about it is the process, right? That's the training to read process. And anyway, make it fun and don't do it too much. Do it enough. Mm-hmm. But something in there is the way to go.
Excellent.
We're at an hour and 18 minutes.
And we haven't answered any questions in the second hours. We're doing it, Zach. Sorry, man. Thoughts on the new super straight phenomenon?
Oh man,
I think it's great.
Yep, it's really something. But I feel like it's the first stage in the discovery of a whole clade of
gender identities.
Their gender identities, yes. It's the first, because the thing is, it's one thing to only be attracted to people.
Or sexual orientation identities? I don't even
know. I don't know
Yeah,
which it is, but it is one thing to be attracted to only people who were born into the sex
that you're not. That
right.
you weren't born into, that
right.
you're not.
But it's another thing.
I think cisness is included in
It's another thing to have always been only attracted. And then there's yet another thing in which you
super straight.
Believe exactly.
Super perma straight. Super straight.
No, it's ultra super straight. And then if you believe it is going to continue that way based on your experience of yourself, then it would be ultra super perma straight, I believe. Mm-hmm. So anyway, no, what I really think about this,
so deep.
It's not, but the thing that I really think is this. This is a wonderful demonstration of a premise that all adults should be well aware of, which is that
we haven't said what it is. Like
super straight.
Yeah. Oh. Probably most people watching know, but
So in an effort not to be belittled and silenced, I believe a large number of people who do not subscribe to the new what is it even?
Ideology?
The new version of trans ideology have recognized themselves as their own. They have effectively.
Can I try?
Please.
I think that there was one guy who made a video and he
Awesome.
said, you know what? Just because a straight guy said, I'm not into dudes who declare that they're women, and that doesn't make me transphobic. What I am is super straight, which means I'm a dude and I like women who were born as girls. And okay, you need that to be a gender identity? I'm going to call that super straight. Not transphobic, I'm super straight.
Yeah, what she said.
Okay. So
yeah, okay. So starting from there. So
Yes.
I was trying really hard not to get canceled. And anyway, I think I did a very poor job. But yes,
well, I think there's nothing in what you said that was cancelable.
that's because it was not parsable. And
Yes.
therefore, well, actually that's no protection, is it? But
No, it's not. Okay.
in any case, here's the thing. When you set up rules of the game,
Mhm.
right, these rules that we have been handed are rules in which somebody has cheated and they've placed themselves at advantage by building a taxonomy that we have to subscribe to because the claim is that science has discovered this thing, right? And so very clever for somebody to pick up on those rules and say, oh yeah, okay, even in that rule set, actually you've handed me exactly the tool because you've basically said that anything goes with respect to a new gender identity, and I got one. And so the point is, look,
Yep.
it's Rawlsian veil of ignorance stuff,
Mhm.
right? Don't make any rule you don't want to live on the wrong side of. And so the fact that somebody made up a bunch of rules that they're now going to force us into with respect to gender identity, two can play at that game.
Right.
And so anyway,
Especially since they didn't cap the number of possible gender identities. Boy, we can run wild with this.
yeah, man. So
Yeah.
anyway, I think I'm pleased at the invention of super straight as a fancy new gender identity when really a lot of us have not had a name for what we were for so long.
Yeah. Minority position. Yeah.
Ooh.
Okay. What is the best evidence to prove that humans are omnivores and not vegetarian or vegan? I'd argue that a lack of access to meat led to our ancestors eating less of it rather than physiology or moral superiority.
Well, I think the strongest evidence against strict veganism or vegetarianism is the orneriness of strict vegans and vegetarians. Sorry.
It's going to be it's the if to the degree I now can't tell if the person asking the question was being ridiculous or if just Bret is being ridiculous.
But the implication of your sentence is that I was definitely being ridiculous.
You're included in that
either way.
category regardless. Yeah.
Got
So
it.
the evidence, Zach, if you just want to show for a moment, is going to be teeth and gut. The best physical evidence that we have. Oh, terrific. So this is from the Animal Diversity Web, which came out of University of Michigan, for which I have contributed back in the day. And you see the carnassials on these mammalian carnivores. I think this is a wolf. Yep. That these are these shearing teeth. These are basically premolars and maybe also molars. Oh yeah. That have been fused into carnassials, the likes of which you'll find on all the carnivorans. Compare that to.
So the purpose of those teeth is the tearing of muscle fibers.
I'll go back there. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The ripping apart of muscle fibers compared to that's a classic herbivore tooth, which are good at basically smashing cell walls, which plants have and which animal cells don't. And so you find evidence in dentition differences and then in gut differences as well, where the longer the gut, the more likely, and obviously other things like additional stomachs and such, but the longer the gut, the more likely you have a higher percentage of plants in your diet or have an exclusively plant diet. And we have
leaf. Frugivores have short guts.
Yes, leaf, and we have a pretty short pretty shortcut.
Pretty shortcut. And the evidence is probably much stronger than our dentition would suggest because of our tendency to cook meat, which goes back a long way, which means that the need to tear these fibers apart in their original form is much reduced. So the extent that our dentition reflects a certain amount of carnivory is probably, it's a cautious conclusion. But the other thing is, we know an awful lot about hunter-gatherers who either continue to exist in a few cases, have recently existed. We know what their diets looked like, and we have a lot of fossil and subfossil evidence from people that we modern science types didn't get to observe directly, and it all suggests the presence of meat in the diet.
Well, you can do, so fossil and subfossil evidence, you can look at dentition. You obviously can't look at gut.
No. It doesn't even necessarily have to be the individuals, right? We have hearths and things like this. There's and butchery.
Oh, material evidence. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer is there's a ton of evidence of various different kinds, and it all points to a degree of carnivory, right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't say anything about what we should do, or maybe it implies something about what we should do, but it doesn't say it directly. But from the point of view of what we did evolutionarily, this is utterly unambiguous.
Yeah. Did the laws of physics evolve? Like DNA is specific to Earth, if the universe was to start over from a sort of Big Bang, would physics be different from now?
I think this is an easy question.
I do too, but it's a fascinating one.
It's a great one.
Yeah.
And I would say,
You haven't answered it yet.
You just want the yes or no answer?
Well, we both said, I think it's an easy question. It's an easy question, right?
I would say
You were about to launch into a long explanation, which you don't include the answer, I think.
I would say the laws of physics will be the same, and the simple structures of the universe will be the same, and biology will evolve. It may or may not be similar. It will have some similarities, no matter where we find it, and it may well have large differences. In fact, I believe it would likely have large differences at the level of the particulars.
Yeah, the physics don't evolve is my position as well. So you had begun. So
the A part is properly understood. Biology is the extension of a physical process, and this is going to be a little bit of speaking in riddles that will have to be revisited later. But I believe the right way to understand evolution is that you have selection before you ever have anything biological. Selection produces all of the patterns in the universe, right? And that process eventually gets elaborated into something with heredity, which causes selection, which pre-exists biology, to turn into adaptive evolution, which results in critters. But the point is, it's actually a natural extension of the physics.
Yeah.
And, the idea that selection is inherent to biology is wrong. Selection pre-exists it and, it continues through. It's the heredity that makes the adaptation happen.
Yep. Genetically, you are a fish. Are you a stoner mimetically? So we could answer this at the individual level or at the population level. And I would say individually, no, not anymore.
I'm not even sure what the question is asking.
Well, so at the population level,
yep.
I remember that on the day that I met Bob Trivers, as I approached his office with some fear because I didn't know what kind of an amazing and terrifying professor he might be, I passed a sign for a talk he had given the day before at the big amphitheater at UC Santa Cruz on the coevolution of marijuana and humans. And I wasn't there for that talk. I don't know what he said, nor have I pursued this much. But if there's something to that, if the relationship between humans and marijuana is somewhat ancient, is it, could we be said to be mimetically stoners at the population level?
All right.
Does that strike you as a plausible interpretation of what the question might mean?
Yep. And you were going to head to an answer, or?
No, I don't.
Okay. So then I would say the problem with that is that it's too narrow, right? We are all very definitely descendants of ancestors with psychedelic experience of one kind or another. It's too common in cultures to have some mechanism to get to hallucinations.
Consciousness hackers.
Consciousness hackers.
Mhm.
Humans are consciousness hackers, and the culture that doesn't do it is the exception.
Yeah.
That proves the rule.
Stoner is too narrow. Marijuana
Stoner is too narrow,
Yep.
yes.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
the point is, you're not definitely downstream of a culture that had a relationship with marijuana, but you're definitely downstream of a culture that had a relationship with hallucination.
Yeah, for sure. Bret, you recently talked about a model for a... Oh, wow, I just lost. Where'd it go?
You got this.
Bret, you recently talked about a model for a shared consciousness. Have you read Douglas Hofstadter's work on the topic? Specifically, I Am a Strange Loop, but to a lesser extent, also Gödel Escher Bach.
Nope. Probably should.
Yeah, I read parts of Gödel Escher Bach a long time ago, and I don't know I Am a Strange Loop, and maybe if it's essay length, maybe we could read it together. I find him dense. I find it hard to get through his stuff. But he's got good ideas, so you don't. That's the answer.
I don't have good ideas? Now you tell me?
It seemed like the right moment.
Well, this is awkward. Will you guys give us a minute? Can we have the room? Can we have the net?
Next question. Serotonin, dopamine, and other hormonal regulators are always described as making you feel happy, sad, etc. Is this overly mechanistic? Is it possible that feeling happy or sad produces serotonin and dopamine?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is totally overly mechanistic, and it not only potentially gets causation reversed sometimes, but it also pretends that it's all proximate and there is no ultimate explanation for why we have these states and these hormones in the first place.
yeah, and I believe there was a study many decades ago about serotonin and hierarchy. You got it?
Lobsters.
Right, but this was not
No.
lobsters. This was primates.
Oh, well, long before Jordan wrote his now previous book, I'm going to find, I used to include this lobster thing in my lectures, actually. So I will find it if I can.
Okay. So what I was going to say, and it's been a million years since I've seen this work, and it's possible I've misremembered something, but my sense was that serotonin rose with position in primate hierarchy, and that the interesting thing was, if you gave a low-ranking primate serotonin, if you artificially elevated serotonin in the primate would begin to behave as if they were dominant. And of course, the response then has to be, if you think carefully about what has to happen next, if it were true that simply having more serotonin put you at a higher place in the hierarchy, then simply you'd make more serotonin.
Right.
So what has to happen is you get your ass kicked if you start behaving like you're dominant because you're full of serotonin.
Right.
And so the point is, it does suggest that
Totally.
you can speak about this very mechanistically, and you'll miss that actually it's part of a more interesting story.
Absolutely. So I found the slide that I would give in one of my very early animal behavior lectures when I taught animal behavior, when I was just introducing some of the interesting stuff going on at various clades. So it reads, I guess I don't have to read it out loud because this doesn't go audio only, but I'll read it anyway. This is among the crustaceans. It's not lobsters, it's crayfish. Some male crayfish establish dominance hierarchies through combat. When escaping, the loser exhibits a backwards tail flip behavior that simultaneously shoots him backwards and signals his submission to the other. And the winner of the fight exhibits a forwards tail flip that signals his dominance. What's new with this research, which was published in 1996 in Science, is that both types of tail flip are prompted by the neurotransmitter serotonin. Depending on social circumstance, serotonin produces opposite behaviors.
So you're telling me not only is it not a rock and not a rock lobster, it's a crayfish?
It's a crayfish.
That's amazing. All right.
I know.
That's interesting. So, yeah, cool. And that's from early lecture of yours.
Yeah, I did that every time. So the opening slide for this lecture, you can show again, Zachary. This is my animal diversity lecture, which usually took 8 or 9 hours over the course of many days, that I would just go through. We've got
formatting's
caterwauling,
way
the
off.
formatting, because it's an older version of because I haven't lectured in 4 years now. The formatting got off, but just introducing the various. We got a few good mollusks, and then I think not quite. We got arthropods right up front. Yep.
I miss your lectures.
I kind of do too. They were a lot of fun.
But you invested in building them so mightily. They were a thing to behold.
Yeah, maybe there's another opportunity at some point to do those again somehow. The Biden administration has usurped and poisoned the word unity intentionally. What can we do to rebrand?
Yeah, I agree. I cannot help but take this a bit personally, but it's also at some level, I believe, flack over the target. I think they realized that, this is a resonant concept for a reason, because frankly, a lot of us are sick of this shit.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, what can we do to rebrand? Stay tuned. That's coming. Mm-hmm. It's really important. And, let's put it this way. The silver lining on the Democratic Party having stolen the word unity is that they're not any good at it.
They don't seem to be good at it.
No, they're decidedly terrible.
Yeah. I looked it up for you. Dr. Seuss tends to write an amphibrasic tetrameter or sometimes anapestic. So we actually, at the beginning of the Q&A last week, had heard from our moderator that it was anapestic tetrameter, which is, I can do it again. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. No, I can't do it now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I don't know what amphibrasic, or it could be amphibrachic, but it looks like amphibrasic means. But tell us in the chat. Maybe Zach will see it and will tell us.
Yeah.
Or I'll look it up.
That's
later.
Awesome. And I feel lame for having thought for even a moment that it might be iambic pentameter and
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Iambic being 1, 2, and then pentameter 5. Right.
There it is.
There it is. On the importance of natural, dark, and quiet. These places exist closer by. See Eastern Oregon, John Day country. Absolutely. Lived here for 6 years, headed to Alaska in 2 weeks. Will miss the clear skies and silence. I'm a fellow wildlife biologist in her 50s. Love the streams. Thanks. Thank you. You're headed to Alaska where you're going to miss the clear skies and silence. You must be going to Anchorage or some other place. It seems like Alaska should have a lot of natural, dark, and quiet.
A lot of dark all at once.
A lot of dark all at once.
Good luck. Enjoy Alaska. Bring socks. That's what I've heard.
Considering your discussion on the benefits of appreciating nature, do the two of you meditate? Good day from Australia. No, not in so much. We don't call it that. I did. I've mentioned here before. I was lucky enough to spend 2 weeks when I was at the end of high school on a Buddhist artist retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh and a number of beat poets from the 60s. And I was like the representative teenager who'd been invited by my creative writing teacher, who was himself a beat poet. And for those 2 weeks, we did, Thich Nhat Hanh led us in 3 sitting and 1 walking meditation every day. But I didn't maintain, I didn't really develop, and I loved that time, but I didn't develop the habit, nor have you ever done so. But I think we both find other ways of finding peace from our own thoughts, which I'm sure for those people who are active meditators will find that description of what it does or what it is impossibly naive. But I think, biking, paddleboarding, kayaking, like there's a number of activities that are active but solitary that provide that. And maybe it is a kind of, sometimes for me it is meditative, and maybe because I did learn about meditation from one of the greats, and one of the kinds of meditation we were doing was a walking meditation. Maybe you might actually call it that, and maybe part of why I'm so resistant and find it so anathema when you got me a fancy helmet which would allow you to speak into my head while I was biking. It's like, I'm going to hurl this thing into the sea. I have no interest
Where it will
in
float,
this.
I promise.
It can talk to itself then somewhere else.
Well, I'm not gonna relitigate that one, but I will say, with respect to meditation,
Yeah.
I'm actually in the running for world's worst meditator.
I believe this.
Yes, I am really not good at this. I mean, sometimes I can do it, not for long periods, but 6-7 seconds in a row.
Sure.
I can really get into some stuff. But yeah, I'm absolutely terrible at this, and it drives me crazy. I harbor no belief that I could get good at it. You once got us a experimental thing where we got to try sensory deprivation tank, and
separately 2 sensory deprivation tanks.
Well, it's not really sensory deprivation if you're in the same tank.
Yeah, you would have driven me completely crazy. Because you reported, we did it at the same
drove
time
me completely
in adjacent
crazy.
tanks, and you came out of it going like, I barely survived.
It was like the longest hour of my life. It was so terrible.
I do not get this about you
That
at all.
said,
I didn't love it. Like, I never went back for another one, but I was like, okay, I see it. I could see getting into it, but I'm certainly not going to force the issue. And you were like, it was torture. It was torture.
But yesterday I sat very calmly and watched wildlife and listened to the brook, and I had lots of thoughts. It was cool. And so I don't know. Yeah.
The answer would appear to be no.
Yes. No.
Certainly no for Bret. And maybe I could claim that some of my walks are walking meditations, but honestly, not really.
Yeah.
The dog is like, why are you still on?
Yes.
Oh, we got our elders here. We got our 10-year-old kitty and our 8-year-old dog. It's your birthday tomorrow. Okay. How about let's do 2 more questions.
There are some people who donated a lot of money later on, so I'll mention that after the next question.
Okay. You guys couldn't hear that, presumably, but Zach says he's going to point out some big ticket questions down below that we'll get to. Many animals, for instance cats, play with their tail. Could this be part of the adaptive role of the tail? If not, is the relation completely circumstantial? What's the correct way to think about this? It's interesting.
Good question.
Yeah.
I have
seen training and hunting, like early play.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, I've seen adults flick their tails in
adult people.
No. Interestingly, I can't say that they're not doing it. It's very hard to tell.
Yeah.
But I've seen
that. I'm sure everyone is now wondering. That is an ape synapomorphy, the loss of tail.
The loss of the tail.
It's not just us; it's all the apes.
All the apes,
apes
including
being
the
newly
lesser
derived
apes.
characteristic. Yep, they be apes.
They be apes.
Gibbons. It's the Simang. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the flicking of the tail is a way a parent could cause a young kitten to become sensitized to certain kinds of emotions and things like that.
I think that's actually the 2 examples that I can think of that I know of, to our earlier point. Lion cubs playing with a male's tail is when he puts up with it for a little while and then he's like,
"Yep,
off me."
Right,
kid.
But I would say, look, tail is a complex phenomenon, and the right way to think of it is it does a bunch of things. Which of them has primacy? Which of them drove the evolution of the thing? And then once it evolved, it started doing other things. And so we can ask this question, for things like, why did music evolve? Yes, we can establish that it evolved, that it is an adaptation, and it does many things, right? It rallies people to a cause. It brings them together, synchronizes emotions. It does lots of things. But the question is, what drove the evolution of the first thing that crosses the threshold into qualifying as music? What drove the evolution of tails to the first thing that we would call a tail? And how does that fit with all of the things, in cats, for example, we can say for sure that the tail conveys information about emotional state. It has a huge impact on the cat's ability to reorient in the air and land on its feet. I would guess, if I had to guess one, I would say that parameter, the ability to shift the body by moving the tail in the opposite direction, has primacy. But
apologies if I missed it, but tails are plesiomorphic boy, I'm just using way too many technical terms here today, but tails are plesiomorphic to mammals, meaning that tails are older than mammals, that mammals came into being as mammals already having tails.
Right.
So, they emerged from reptiles, which had tails. And frankly, probably the first tetrapod had tails. So you got tail loss in a couple of clades like frogs and like apes. But, tail is really old.
Really old. And so originally it emerges as a swimming aid,
right,
etc. So incidentally, I almost used plesiomorphy to describe selection in the universe prior to there being heredity.
Oh, nice.
Which you're the only person who would have gotten what I was talking about. But
I get it now.
Yep. But anyway, yes,
I'm
your
glad we
point.
had this moment.
Yeah, me too. This has been nice. Your point is the correct one, which is in this case, we can't say what drove the evolution of tails in mammals because nothing drove the evolution of tails in mammals. Tails arrived as mammals were here. So in that,
but what drove the modification of tails in, well, for instance, cats using their tails to right themselves.
Yep.
Which is useful in cats in concert with the fact that, for instance, they have clavicles that float loose on their skeleton. Their clavicles aren't connected to any other skeletal elements. They're just connected by soft tissue, by ligaments and tendons, or one of the two. I never remember the distinction. Means that they have an ability to do these, twisting acrobatics, whereas a dog would have less. It would be of less value there.
Yeah.
So I don't. What exactly is the character that we're trying to explain about tails? It's not tails. It's something particular to what, for instance, cats can do with tails. And this question says, for instance, cats, but it isn't specifically about cats. So I don't know if, for instance, rodents in a burrow, having been born to a litter, play with their own tails, or play with their siblings' tails, or even once they're out and beginning to forage, if they are, or is it just predator species, or is it play at hunting? Is it a hunting behavior?
Well, it's interesting. Surely somebody has done a review of tail use. I know there's
sure. Has to be.
It's molossid bats, I believe, free-tailed bats that use their tails to find crevices that they back into.
Really?
Yeah.
So they use it kind of like a prehensile.
Well, the thing is, in many, I think it's fair to say most bats, the tail is embedded in the tail membrane, the uropatagia. Free-tailed bats have their tails,
which is who the molossids are.
Yeah, have had their tails freed from that membrane, leaving them more like mouse tails. And
that's like a digit. Oh, that's fascinating.
I sure hope that turns out to still be true. I remember that, I never studied molossids, but I believe that was the explanation.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Zach, the next two questions both look like...
Well, the next one is a guy who sent 3 individual $100 questions, each about GME and AMC, so you should read them together.
Well, but this one is the one I was looking at that is also high.
Yep, and then there's a guy who said $100 with no chat, which is the other one I was pointing out.
I'll read a couple of these, and then you tell me if I missed any, okay?
All right.
Do you think that seasonal affective disorder is actually a disorder? Doesn't it make perfect sense to conserve energy in a dark, cold winter? It seems like the idea of constant work output despite changes in our environment is the problem, ?
Good one.
Yeah, it's really good.
I would say the quick and dirty version of this is that something seasonal that fits this pattern is almost undoubtedly adaptive. A pattern in your motivation to go do versus stay still. Probably it doesn't serve us.
Hold on. Related to, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago when I was talking about some of that moon research, the finding that in environments absent electric lights, people will sometimes I can't remember how it went, sometimes go to bed after the sun sets, but very rarely wake up before the sun rises. And given that is the case, absent electric lights, you would expect people the farther you are from the equator, the longer you would sleep in the winter. absent electric lights,
Right.
and therefore constraining ourselves to a 8 to 5 job and a constant expectation about when you go to bed and when you wake up, regardless of what's actually going on astronomically, is a hyper novel problem.
Right. And then imagine that you project this into populations living near or above the Arctic Circle. Then the point is it grows incoherent very quickly.
Yeah.
So what this says is there's some ancestral adaptive pattern. That ancestral adaptive pattern is probably irrelevant to people who can artificially light their environments and have effectively unlimited access to food, right? So we can be productive indoors during hours that we might, if we had lived in primitive circumstances, had been better off sleeping to preserve energy. So there's an incoherence between modernity and the adaptation problem. But then add on top of that, undoubtedly, populations differ in their adaptive response. An equatorial population shouldn't have seasonal effect of anything, right? So given that, and given that we're now mixing almost at random, the point is, well, how much of our predisposition to that adaptation is genetic? That's an open question. To the extent it's genetic, what happens if two people who come from different, latitudes produce offspring? What program do they get? Is one of them dominant to the other? And then what do we do with the fact that your program probably doesn't match the place you are anyway? So it might just introduce chaos. And so
yes,
all of those things take the very simple fact of there likely being an adaptation that is connected to this and result in being a horror show in modern times with people who don't know about what they're messing with this in such a profound way.
Excellent. Next question. Bret, I hope that you are a part of the GME and AMC movement. It's the hill to die on for all people. I enjoyed you on Joe Rogan. The Fed created a hedge against society when they repeatedly halted the stocks.
And this guy has 2 other questions, same dollar amount. You should read them.
Okay, I'll read them now before you respond.
Yeah.
Please give me 15 minutes on your thoughts on the GME AMC saga. More money invested into 2 stocks than ever before, and we doubled down when the stock went down 90%, and now it physically or mathematically cannot go down. The real deal revolution. Please research r/GME. And then I have $100,000 in GME and AMC. And on February 24th, 25th, I turned $10K into $1 million. About to do it way bigger this time. You can take the $300 and buy a GME, though. I don't think that, I think that just means
it's
though.
Currently at close-ish to 300, so he's just saying take that $300.
And buy a GME, okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is cool. Thank you. I would say we are not invested. That may be dumb. I am very much invested in this idea and the fact that these markets have become about, the markets are there to generate value that is supposed to be recovered as an enhancement on well-being. That is to say, the mechanisms of the market, the mythology of them is about the production of value, and the degree to which these markets are very much about something else most of the time. And what I have said is that really, ultimately, the only way to profit in the market is either through superior insight about some sort of industry. If you can see where an industry is going before the other experts can see it, you can profit, and then insider information of one kind or another. And so, in effect, the hedge funds have been playing the insider information game and doing so in a way that is legal or quasi-legal or who knows. And so to see a collaborative effort, a ground-up collaborative effort confront that pattern with a similar kind of power, and then to see how many apparently unfair tactics were unleashed on them, because apparently the idea is the license to bend the rules is extreme if you come in through one door and it's disallowed if you come in through another, was fascinating. So anyway, I don't know what more to say about it. I'm not an expert in it by any stretch of the imagination, but I am fascinated by the effectively the revelation of what our system is built of by smart people who are not part of the institutional structure.
Yeah. I will say one more thing about it, which is that we're not invested in it, but our son and producer, Zachary, is a little bit.
I
And
have 3 stocks at $60 each. So
Zach has 3 stocks at $60 each. Zach, you want to pull up the page that has your T-shirts on it? So Zach actually created a little bit of merchandise.
Let me bring that up for
And
1 second.
I'm just going to talk, and you can tell me if I'm wrong while you're pulling it up, Zach. As I understand it, you say that, and you did, that you would invest any profits that you made in GME, and that you would, I guess you'd have diamond hands, Zach. Is that right? And
the idea is invest 100% of the profits from these shirts into GME. So obviously, not revenue, but profits after product costs, ads, etc. A bunch of designs here that people who know about the GME movement specifically will understand, and may be very unclear to people who don't know about it. So many of these sentiments don't really mean anything unless you know, or unless you've spent time in the subreddit specifically. But
so you're mic'd right now, Zach? People can hear you?
right now. They can hear me.
You are? Okay. And can people see the URL if they were interested in going?
Yep. So it's just gme-to-the-moon.shop if you're interested in shirts, and 100% of the profits do go into GME.
And somewhere
I appreciate it.
There are hedge fund guys selling shirts that say GME to the moon and back.
Yes. Yep, they're definitely trying to bring that ship home.
Yep. Yes, they are.
Yeah. Well, gosh, a lot more great questions here, and we'll get to a few of them at the beginning of next week, but we managed to go way long, and it is still beautiful out for a couple more hours. So I think we're probably going to sign off and try to get outside for a little bit of what's remaining of this beautiful day in the Pacific Northwest. We thank you, as always, for being here, for being interested in what we have to say. Encourage you to join us at either of our Patreons. Please subscribe to the channel if you're not, and perhaps the Clips channel as well. Like this video if you liked it. Don't lie. And
go ahead and lie.
If you're still here now,
that's
a lot of hate watching if you didn't like it.
Do not underrate some of our dedicated detractors.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. I'm not underrating them. But yeah, we'll be here again next week. We'll see you then.
And I think I'm gonna go meditate. And I'm done.
Get outside, everyone.
Be well.